The Trump administration did something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. One thing we do know for sure, the only entity that is more terrified than Maduro right now is the Islamic regime in Iran. What makes things different this time? The regime's stability is at a historic low. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Off the Record. In a time when rage bait and headlines travel faster than truth, this show exists to pause, question, and cut through the noise. We believe in having difficult conversations without losing our sanity and humanity. I'm Zina Rachamilova, and thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been quite a week, hasn't it? Since the last episode that we filmed, so much has happened across the globe. In just 1 week, we began with protests erupting all over Iran, the largest protest since the Women Life Freedom movement after the murder of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. And then, before the week was over, the Trump administration did something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. They struck Venezuela and captured the narco-dictator Nicolás Maduro and his wife. The U.S. brought both of them to New York City, and the two will be held in the Brooklyn Detention Center until further notice. We'll be unpacking all of this today on Off the Record. Let's get into it. We know that the people of Iran have been at the mercy of this brutal dictatorship since 1979. The Islamic Republic of Iran is an authoritarian regime that survives through repression, fear, and violence against its own people. It jails, tortures, and executes dissidents, crushes women's rights, censors the press, and violently suppresses protests. Iranians face poverty and isolation while the regime funnels money into terrorism and proxy wars across the Middle East. This regime has no democratic legitimacy, no accountability, and no tolerance for freedom. Now, these demonstrations began in Tehran, and they spread across the country in the backdrop of the economy. Iran's currency has plummeted and become completely worthless. Right now, one Iranian rial is worth 0.00024 US dollars. There's actually a video circulating on Iranian social media showing that it requires an entire table of banknotes equaling to hundreds of millions of rial just to buy one mobile phone. That's how bad the economic crisis is in Iran. What's meaningful about these protests is that the Bazari class, the class of merchants that were essential in the revolution in 1979, some of them joined these protests. During the revolution, the Bazaris were crucial in mobilizing grassroots support and providing funding, shelter, and organizational networks for demonstrations against the Shah. And now, we're seeing videos coming from the Grand Bazaar in Tehran showing that these stores are closed, and even stores that are open, which are probably regime loyalists, are forced to close because of these demonstrations. But what's really interesting is that despite media narratives framing these protests as a response to inflation or economic hardship, that is not what Iranians on the streets are demanding. If you listen to the slogans made in these demonstrations, you aren't hearing complaints about the economy or the cost of living. You are hearing Iranians chant against the Islamic Republic itself that has oppressed them for 47 years. You hear slogans like, "Until the mullahs are dead, we won't be free," or "Death to the dictator." They're also demanding that the regime stop supporting terror, namely Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is what they're chanting, and this is what should be the focus when we talk about these protests, not framing it as if it's economic grievances. No, they are fighting for their freedom. Some people may say, this isn't the first time Iranians have risked their lives on the streets, so what's really going to change now? Well, what's meaningful and unique about this round of protests is that they're happening in the backdrop of the Iranian war with Israel. Israel demonstrated how weak the Iranian regime actually was after the 12-day war in June, and Israel's decisive victory gave the people of Iran greater confidence that the regime isn't an impenetrable force. So For the first time during these protests, the regime is clearly worried, so much so that Israel even thought it would launch an attack out of desperation to deflect on what's actually happening on their streets. So, what makes things different this time? The regime's stability is at a historic low. Now, for weeks before these protests, Israel was deeply concerned about Iran launching a strike after monitoring their missile drills. We all knew that the regime's nuclear threat posed an existential danger to Israel, especially since it was something that Netanyahu has warned us about for years. But now, after the war, Iran's ballistic missile program is seen as an equally grave existential threat. If Israel and the U.S. don't have enough interceptors to stop the missiles from landing at Israeli communities, the damage would equal to that of a nuclear strike. Does this mean that Israel may potentially go to war with Iran? It's hard to say. Dynamics in the Middle East can shift within minutes, and given what happened in Venezuela, which we'll cover shortly, the regime is on its knees. I think Trump has sent a very powerful message against everyone in the so-called axis of resistance this weekend. Israel, therefore, has even more incentive to stop Iran in its tracks and prevent an attack. Now, during the Mar-a-Lago summit, President Trump said he would support an Israeli attack against the regime's ballistic missile program. And this is a pretty big deal because we know that Iran, while pausing its efforts to create a nuclear program, has actually accelerated its efforts to rebuild its ballistic missile program in the last 6 months. It has purchased thousands of ballistic missiles from China and is trying to recover many of the military bases that deal with it. So when President Trump makes it clear that there's no daylight between the U.S. and Israel when it comes to handling this regime, it sends a powerful message to the supreme leader. What I want to bring the focus back to is the people of Iran. The people on the streets protesting now are some of the bravest people I think I've ever seen. Quite frankly, I think all of us who have grown up in Western democracies lack an appreciation for what Iranians are fighting for on the streets. We can't really appreciate what it means to safely participate in a protest without risking your life or your family's life. Under the Islamic regime, if your face is photographed or if authorities get wind of your involvement, you could face an unfair trial and even be sentenced to death. Your family, your kids can all be taken away from you in an instant. So for all of us sitting in democracies, wherever we are, we should be grateful, we should be inspired by Iranians, and we should all be speaking up for them. The fact that Israeli leaders sent a message of solidarity to the people of Iran at the beginning of these protests was amazing, and the fact that Mossad had published a post on X telling Iranians, "We're in the field with you," is so important and meaningful because it lets Iranians know that they are not alone and that Mossad is on the ground working to try to help these protesters. Iranians on the streets need support, but at a minimum, they need leaders around the world to just publicly declare solidarity with them. They need America and the entire West to make it clear that they stand shoulder to shoulder with the people and continue to bring attention to the protest movement internationally. This is why Donald Trump's post on Truth Social said that the United States will come to the rescue of the Iranian people. This is what Western leaders should be doing, and public statements like this are not enough. Western leaders should be giving these protesters practical, logistical, and cyber support, providing internet access to help Iranians stay online when the regime shuts it down, providing secure communication tools to evade surveillance, protecting activists from cyber attacks and digital tracking. They should be providing real-time intelligence to protesters. They should be amplifying dissidents instead of regime propaganda. This kind of assistance does not choose Iran's future for its people. It gives them the tools to choose it themselves. If democracies claim to stand for freedom, dignity, and sovereignty, then helping peaceful protesters survive against an authoritarian regime is what is needed. This is not about foreign policy or intervention. It's about solidarity with a population whose basic rights are being systematically denied. When a regime survives by censoring the internet, jailing dissenters, and killing unarmed civilians, helping the people communicate and organize and protect themselves is an extension of democratic values. So with that, let us tell the people of Iran that we in Israel stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and we will be the ones speaking up for you when the regime attempts to silence you. Now, let's talk about Venezuela. On Saturday, January 3rd, the U.S. struck the Venezuelan capital city of Caracas and then announced that President Nicolás Maduro, along with his wife, have been captured and transported out of the country. The operation happened overnight, and from what we understand, it happened so quickly that Maduro was not even able to reach his safe room in time. He will be arraigned in federal court in the coming days for drug offenses and other crimes committed against the U.S. Maduro's wife and his sons have also been indicted. Trump later shared a photo of Maduro on a U.S. naval ship heading to New York, where the dictator and his wife will be held in a detention center charged with weapon and drug offenses. Now, there's a lot to unpack about Venezuela, and I've already seen a lot of people explaining the history of the country and the way in which Hugo Chavez ruined the country and how Nicolás Maduro made it a lot worse. One of the richest countries in South America became one of the poorest under these two, and essentially turned Venezuela into a failed state. Between the Chavez regime and the Maduro regime, they've destroyed the economy, there's no foreign investment, and the country has faced international sanctions. About 8 million Venezuelans fled the country because of these two. That is 1/4 of the population. Can you imagine what 1/4 of your country having to leave looks like because things have gotten so bad? Venezuelans fled to Colombia, many across Latin America, and many to the United States. The Maduro regime destroyed the economy and made it essentially impossible to live in Venezuela. So I encourage everyone interested to take a look into the history in detail, and more specifically to speak to Venezuelans who've lived through it all, and not to privileged Americans who have no idea what they're talking about. But what I do want to discuss here is what comes next. What does this mean for Israel, America, and the world, frankly? There have been a number of reasons laid out by Trump as to why this operation was necessary. One is drugs. Another is oil. It is believed that Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil in the world. Another reason is the allegation that Maduro has been releasing some of his criminals and gangs into the U.S. We know the CIA has been on the ground in Venezuela for months now, and clearly there wasn't much of a fight. The U.S. went in strategically, taking out power, taking out key facilities, and ultimately they were able to arrest Maduro. There had been conversations for weeks about a negotiated exit for the dictator, but as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio said at the press conference, Maduro kept playing games. He tried to posture, tried to assert authority he didn't really have. Eventually, the U.S. lost its patience. Now, here's a more detailed timeline. In 2020, the U.S. charged Maduro and 14 members of his inner circle with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, money laundering, and corruption. It offered a $15 million reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest. In 2024, Maduro was declared the winner of the presidential election, even though voting tallies collected showed that the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, won by a landslide. The countries that recognized Maduro's so-called victory in 2024 included Cuba, China, Russia, North Korea, and the Islamic Republic of Iran and Assad's Syria. These were the types of governments that were willing to legitimize Maduro's election. And it was very clear to the international community, and especially clear to the Venezuelan people, that Maduro did not win that election. Because of that, Maduro has long been viewed internationally as the illegitimate leader of Venezuela. Now in 2025, the U.S. increased its reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $25 million. This reward then doubled in August of 2025 to $15 million. If you watch the press conference with Trump, Hegseth, and Rubio, they reiterated there has been indictment on Maduro for a while. In fact, Rubio made the joke that America just saved itself $15 million when they arrested Maduro themselves. In September of 2025, the U.S. launches strikes on what it says were drug smuggling boats targeting vessels in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Between September and December, more than 100 people were killed in the strikes. October 2025, Trump authorizes the CIA to conduct covert operations inside of Venezuela. Maduro addresses the people of the United States in a television address saying, "No war, yes peace." All of this led up to what happened over the weekend and led to Trump's announcement that the U.S. will be temporarily running Venezuela. I still have no idea what that means. He might be serious, or this might be another ploy by Trump to say things like he did about the Gaza Riviera, maybe as a political tactic to make his enemies do what he wants them to do, but we have yet to see how this pans out. I also want to mention that some commentators who are happy about Maduro's arrest are also saying that they're worried in the way that it was done because they feel that Trump's aim here is oil in Venezuela, which he talked about several times in the press conference, more than he talked about the stability and future of Venezuela. Now, has the U.S. violated international law? There are arguments that are saying both things. Is there precedent for something like this? Yes. Only time will tell what will actually happen next. Remember, it's only the beginning of the week, so who knows where we'll be by the end of it. And if there's anyone whose actions we can never predict, it's U.S. President Donald Trump's. One thing we do know for sure is that the only entity that is more terrified than Maduro right now is the Islamic regime in Iran. Venezuela, under Maduro, has become a hub for America's adversaries, including the regime, which used the country to evade U.S. sanctions, move oil, fuel, and weapons. Several years ago, the Iranian regime concluded a major 20-year cooperation treaty with Venezuela. One of its many provisions was secretly transferring 1 million hectares of Venezuelan farmland to Iranian control. The regime's proxy, Hezbollah, runs military training centers in restricted sections of Venezuela. The alliance with the Maduro regime provides Tehran with opportunities to target U.S. interests and spread its influence across Latin America. Then there's Russia, which relied on Venezuela as a strategic partner near the United States with military, intelligence, and diplomatic access in Latin America. China risked billions in loans, infrastructure investments, and long-term influence for Venezuela. Outing Maduro disrupts this entire network, the entire axis of resistance. With the U.S. military presence surrounding Venezuela, the collapse of the Maduro regime could weaken the broader authoritarian network that challenged the U.S. Whatever your thoughts are, the stakes go way beyond Venezuela itself. Under Maduro, the country fueled mass poverty and forced migration, transnational crime and drug trafficking, and it allowed foreign adversaries to operate dangerously close to the U.S. Maduro's fall could reshape security across Latin America and set the tone for how authoritarian systems are confronted in the future. The big picture? This isn't just a Venezuelan story. It's a test case for the entire region. What comes next will determine whether that side of the hemisphere becomes safer or far more fragile. As we watch these events unfold, from Jerusalem to Tehran to Washington and Caracas, let us remember that we must be responsible and accountable for how we talk about what happens next. These actions affect all of us, and so I thank you for joining me and having another deep discussion on Off the Record. We'll see you again next time.